Good morning, everyone. This is Beth Guide with Talking Purple in a rainy Houston, Texas here on May 1st. There's a lot going on, as there always is, and we're going to try to make sense of some things that just don't make sense, I suppose. Um, I don't even know that I can say making sense comment on this bunch of stuff. So I think where I want to start is the Trump assassination attempt. And I know the guy didn't get in the room. I think it was pretty poetic that that this attempt was at a correspondence dinner. I love all the people that say it was staged, because I would pack up my gun and go give up my life and go want to sit myself in jail for the rest of my life, for a staged event. Uh, some things that have flown under the radar is the fact that the alleged shooter is a teacher, which means he has been influencing um, our students. And that is a really big problem. But I think one of the other more prolific issues, he put out this manifesto thing. And what it is it basically proves my point about social media being a problem and how the world we live in is going to become increasingly more difficult to handle. And, all the way along, there's been these narratives about the president. And look, I mean, if you really believe that it's the end of, he's going to end civilization and that he's molesting children and that he's a traitor to the country and that he's the second coming of Hitler, then I cannot blame somebody necessarily for trying to take matters in their own hands and save the country or save people from, what they think they need to be saved from. But the problem is that in all of these situations that I just listed, if you had full knowledge, I think you would make different decisions. I mean, because in this guy's case, he was educated. I mean, it's not like he's somebody that lived in the woods and just decided to come out and do stuff like this. This was an educated person that lives in our society. And I'm going to say, I think this is the same for the people that are the ones that got killed up in Minnesota over the ICE situation. Again, if you think you are trying to save somebody, this behavior is consistent with that. But the problem is that we continue to gin up um, the public. The media continues to whip up the public. The Democrat Party continues to whip up the public. Okay. Um, his 3 points, and I'm thinking of where I want to start with. They say they say Trump's a traitor, and I think that the person that tried to shoot him, these are his 3 points: a rapist, pedophile, traitor. Well, the traitor comes from this whole Russia collusion story. And the Russia collusion story was debunked 6 times over. I still see very smart people repeating over and over and again that this was a real thing. If you actually took both sides of it and removed yourself out of the social media echo chamber, you would see that the Russia collusion story. I mean, the second they came back with the hookers and the hotel and all of that, I kind of knew it was a trumped up, no pun intended, story. Um, because again, I try to have common sense in all I do. The pedophile knock is because of Epstein. And the belief that there is something about the president in the Epstein files and that ongoing narrative. And I am going to say common sense dictates to me that if the president was in the Epstein files, the Democrats would have released it when they had the White House. I there was such a deep state set of operatives that they knew that Trump was going to run for president again. They tried to get him with this legal stuff and a convicted felon and all the other stuff that's gone on. Um, and the reality of that is that if they would not have had to go down legal roads if they had the Epstein files and if there was something in the Epstein files about Trump. So that's why I personally think the stuff about Trump in the Epstein files, whether he's mentioned or not, was benign, because if there really was something in there, he would have been like Prince Andrew and frog marched all over the place while he wasn't the president of the United States. Furthermore, I think, and I'm going to say this, the Democrats need to be careful on the Epstein files, because I think there's more people on the Democrat side than are on the Republican side. Um, and I'm very interested in how this thing, like with Eric Swalwell, went down. That they ran him right out of the rail. They've known this about him for many years, if I had to guess. And yet now, because they didn't want him in the governor's race, they use it. So, politically, your enemies will use what they need when it's an appropriate time to use it. For as much as the left throws a fit about Trump, if any of these accusations were true, I would have to believe that this was out and about already. And last but not least, we're going to talk about this rapist situation, because putting a label for, well, let me stay. For those of you that don't know this, I actually had to look this up because I was like, wait up a second. Um, First of all, the allegation was supposed to have happened back in 1996. And from 1996 to 2022, there was no mention of any of this. Trump was on Home Alone. Trump was on TV. I was just watching Bones, and Trump was mentioned in Bones, the old TV show from the 90s, or excuse me, from the 2000s. Um, if if this was, why wait until from 1996 to 2022? And I know there was a jury, it was a civil trial, it was all of that. And the judge in that case was the one that said, oh, well, the charges and what happened were similar. And then Stephanopoulos ran down the road with it. And again, and he and ABC were forced to pay a lot of money, from my understanding, for damages, because it was slander or libel. I mean, I guess it was more libel because it was on TV, but in either event, there was a lot of money paid out because something was said that was not accurate. And the problem is, this stuff is getting into our fabric of our social media. It's getting into these algorithms. It's being repeated over and over. And because that's happening, we end up with this situation where nobody knows what the truth is. And now we have a guy running around with a gun trying to take um, corrective action, because pedophile, rapist, traitor. And I the other thing is, and it's sad to me, and it makes me worried, I will say, when I see the people on TikTok saying, well, too bad that they missed, or um, you know, upset that this didn't happen. I don't have any political character that ever was involved in this country that I ever would have wished dead. But what I will say is that any president that's ever been assassinated has also become a martyr. So maybe the left needs to rethink that, because what they're going to do is they're just going to end up making this even all that much more grandiose about him. Um, Reagan got a lot of favorable treatment when he was shot. We can look at JFK, we can look at Abraham Lincoln. So there is a reverse psychology in this, and I think that they don't consider it. Um, it would only further increase the Trump mystique, if you will. But the other side of the coin of that is you can't can I guess you can, but it's really speaks volumes, if you will, to what is the problem. Um, how do we fix it? How do we normalize it? And I will say this podcast continues to confound the social media um algorithms, and mostly because I think that it doesn't I'm so in the middle, it doesn't really know whether I'm left or right, because I really just want the facts out. Okay. I really want people to make informed decisions. And I want you to understand why you're left and why you're right and and I mean, to understand Hitler, I don't know that I see Donald Trump murdering millions of people. Um, if you want to talk about ICE or immigration policy, at the end of the day, although I think most of everybody doesn't want their lawn service deported, I think we all recognize that there is a horrific problem in the country with people that are here that shouldn't be, that are committing crimes against people that are here legally. Um, I was listening to um, something, I don't even remember what it was, on what we pay for illegals and how it works, because there's loopholes in the law that allows medical care, education, and how much it's put a burden on our society and how much it's driven up our cost of living. And it's really fascinating. At some point, I probably just need to do a whole little sit down on, you know, the loopholes in the law that allow medical assistance, government assistance, food stamps, and all these social problems for illegals. Last I had heard, it was a like a 20 10 billion dollar number, that here in Harris County, what we're paying for the Harris County Hospital District, because of how many people we're servicing that are not in the country legally. I think our school districts, as much as we're complaining about property tax here in the state of Texas, I think the state of Texas is unduly burdened with educating people that are not paying into the system. Um, and it's growing numbers, it's altering school districts, it's lowering test scores because it's not being handled right. And I mean, I know there's like the humanitarian aspect of all of this, um, but you have to handle it right. And by not handling it right, all you're doing is crippling and crushing a system, which I do think is part of the plan. Because if you can bring us down economically, then you can alter it and put in another form of government or whatever you're trying to do. So, what I will say, and I've said this before too, is that the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia back in 1917, they wanted to overthrow the czar, but they had no plan of what that government went and looked like. And millions of people died because at the hands of the brutality of some of the communist people. And I don't think we teach that in school anymore. We don't teach the Stalins and the Pol Pots and the what happens under these systems, and that what they create. So, not to get too far off topic, there's just a lot of misinformation going on about in the social media areas that are promulgating this pedophile, traitor, rapist, Hitler narrative, and it incites violence. It greenlights violence. I think we need to figure out how to ratchet that back. And I don't know that the team red is as culpable in this as team blue. Okay, so um, but the thing is, do you want to change? Do you want to alter it? What do you want to do? What do you not want to do? So there's that set of problems. Um, the next thing is, and I don't do pop culture much, um, but these late night comedian people that undermine the nation in the name of comedy. Jimmy Kimmel's off the deep end. He's got Trump derangement syndrome off the deep end. You don't wish somebody's spouse dead. There's nothing funny in that. There's nothing funny in making comments about Melania, and her would-be widow appearance. These are just things you don't say. They're not funny. And they're commentary that I wish personally that A, if ratings were bad, take the thing off the air. B, don't watch it. I mean, it's just like The View. I don't know who watches The View. Um, but I stopped watching it years ago. I've always thought Whoopi Goldberg was able to kind of articulate the left side of things, and I've always appreciated about that. And as she's gotten older, she too has gone off the deep end. I mean, she's not Joy Behar off the deep end, but she's off the deep end these days. Know what you believe and be able to articulate what you believe. And if you can do that, you can win arguments. And I should even say win arguments. You can effectively explain to people to help them understand where you're coming from. But this insanity and this hyperbolic approach to everything, all right, it is all it is doing is really destroying the fabric of the nation, to the point where the differences become so great. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to have, a handful of blue states and a handful of red states? I mean, what is your approach to this? What is your end goal? What do you hope to achieve? Because at the end of the day, they're like, well, we want political discourse to bring, uh, about change. I've got people that stand down the corner from my office and protest every Thursday, and they're what they look like are people from the 70s that are now in their 80s. And they're out there with their, no kings sign. Well, if we had a king, they wouldn't be out on the side of the corner because the king wouldn't let them be on the side of the corner. All right. So this is where I don't know who's driving all of this. Um, I don't know what they need a marketing degree maybe, because to walk around and say no kings, I mean, no, nobody thinks they're a king. Um, and if they were a king, they would smash the Height and Ashbury crowd on the corner down the street from me protesting. I don't know what they're protesting. They live in an affluent neighborhood. They they have the right to go protest. What change do you hope to bring about? What are you want someone happy about that you and I think these are the things that people don't think through. These are the things that people don't know what to do with, or they just do without a purpose. Um, it's better to be part of an activist crowd than not to be, is what it seems like to me, is everybody wants to be part of a group. So, but groupthink needs to stop. Um, the next thing I want to touch on is Gavin Newsom. He's kind of I don't know. I don't like Gavin Newsom. He reminds me of the guy in the Santa Claus 3 with the sprayed hair and the Tim Allen. They turned him into like a wooden Santa Claus. And every time I see him, that's what I think of. But here lately, he's trying to act like Trump with trying to label people and call people lazy and sleepy. And the thing is, you don't have the chops to do that. And it shows me somewhat how some people interpret the world. Okay. If you actually understood the people on the right, they don't react to they don't like Trump because Trump calls Joe Biden Sleepy Joe. Um, that's not why they like Trump. And the thing is that I am a pretty, in my real life, off this podcast type thing, I'm a pretty straight shooter, and I can get away with telling people things that they don't want to hear because of my really big personality. And if you don't have a really big personality, you can't do it and I'm going to use the word get away with it, because you come across looking crass or mean spirited. And and I'm going to say it this way, it's a New York bravado. And California doesn't have a New York bravado. So therefore, trying to emulate Trump, I don't know what voter you're thinking you're going to get with that because it's not the presentation of why people like Trump. That's just an enhancement. It's the policies, it's the America first, it's the backing up the country that we live in. It is putting American citizens first. So maybe that's the language you should start to talk about is how do we put Americans first and not put illegals first? Or how do we put Americans first and put families first and stop going down these weird places where we want to mutilate children or we want to, we want to, in the name of, here's a good example, and I've kind of brought this up before a little bit, but we have these committees now in Texas for the school district so that they can review books, and some books they do not want to be curated in school libraries because they're a little bit more graphic or there's no educational value. It's a school library. I mean, if I was going to put together a law library and the book was about a recipe book, I would not include it. It's not book banning. It's I'm curating a library for a certain purpose. And what is the educational value of this book? What is in this book? Is it age appropriate for somebody in the second grade? Um, but the thing is that we want to label it book banning. Well, it's not. Call it what it is. It's curating. Okay. And we have a really bad habit of kind of going down these roads and being hyperbolic in what we do. And when we do that, it looks crass. It looks, you're calling names, but the left thinks they're trying to save people from stuff where the right is just trying to put stuff in proper buckets and keep society held together with some framework around it. Because despite it all, I'm not a rule follower, but on the other side, you do need some framework. You can't just have anarchy every minute of the day. So, I've seen some things go by. And I'm going to segue. I'm going to use my book burning or my book banning thing as a segue into some of this because there's a lot of active people on the left here in our local school district, and they use social media. So there's a relationship between everybody because of the school board. So we have a situation here in Montgomery County and in northern Harris County. It is called Senate District 4, and it's a district that goes from the top of Harris County through Montgomery County and goes all the way to the Gulf of Mexico on the east side of the city. So for those of you who've out of the state, it's a pretty large, it takes almost, when I go fishing, I go to the southernmost end of this, and it's almost 100 miles for me to drive from my house to where I go fishing on the coast. Okay. Just to put it in perspective of what it is. So we have our previous senator, state senator, he resigned. He's at Texas Tech now as the chancellor. And they put the DA from Montgomery County now is running to replace him, and his name is Brett. And it is a super, super red area, like probably 90% red. It's probably 90-10 on in this particular district. So everybody has been trying to get out the vote here and make sure that because in a low turnout election, it's easier to if who's ever more committed will flip it. And tomorrow's election day here in Kingwood for this SD4 position, which I'm encouraging everybody to get out to vote and um, to make your voice heard. Although it's a special election, it's a low turnout election, and we need to get people out and get them to go vote. Okay, so Harris County needs to go vote and get out there. Montgomery County That's a whole story into itself. It's probably not going to be part of this podcast, but Montgomery County is a real mess up there, because they're so red, they're fighting each other as opposed to working towards winning elections, which I think is a little crazy, but that's just my opinion. Um, so we've been out saying, hey, everybody needs to go vote for this guy. We've got a serious flooding problem in the town I live in. This guy came in, he started to learn the issues, and I think he's going to do a really good job at trying to help mitigate flood. Um, he's been able to work with the people that are in charge, including, we have several sets of elected officials here. We have Democrats and Republicans that represent out here. The mayor of Houston is a Democrat. So it's not an unreasonable thing that everybody's got to work together and do their stuff, right? Okay. So we've been out saying, hey, go vote for this guy. He's the right choice. He's got the background. He's, strong on crime. He understands flooding. Go vote for him. So the little minions from the school board show up on some of the posts and they started talking about how they live in a gerrymandered district. And before the Supreme Court ruling came out, I already had gerrymandering on my list of what I want to talk about. And this is what I want to talk about for the rest of the podcast, pretty much. Um, so I live in Kingwood, Texas. And Kingwood, Texas was built by ExxonMobil, well, Exxon, for its executives back in the 80s and early 90s. Okay. And there was Exxon people and there was United people, meaning United Airlines. It was Continental Airlines at the time. And this town was pretty much populated with those two entities, a few shell people, but mostly Exxon and mostly Continental Airlines. So, if I look at the demographics of Exxon and I look at the demographics of the airlines, you kind of understand the people that live here. It was executives, upper end houses, that kind of thing. And back in 1994, the city of Houston identified it as a area that they could take tax money, but not have to reinvest into the infrastructure of the neighborhood because there was no crime. So there wasn't really need, but for one or more cop cars. So very low end maintenance and very high end tax returns. So we were added to the city of Houston back in 1994. They had already done this with the other Exxon enclave down in what's called Clear Lake, which is about an hour south of me. But what they did, because they said that um, in order to put a section in for the city of Houston, a councilman seat, we're District E, uh, you had to be touching, all the things had to be contiguous, so meaning they were touching each other. So this place that's an hour plus south of me and us were put together in one voting district because it was basically the Exxon voting district. And they did it by one little piece of contiguous water, that a stream that basically tied these two areas together. That is the definition of gerrymandering because they took all the upper crust Exxon executive homes, families, and Continental Airlines, and they wanted the tax base, but they didn't want to give us two council seats because they didn't want two Republican council seats. I mean, it's really, let's call it what it really is they didn't want to add two more Republicans to the city of Houston city council. So what they did was they put all of these people together in one district and then said, okay, you all get the same guy. And when I tell you this is an hour away, Clear Lake is NASA. Okay. So Friendswood built Clear Lake, which is why I keep referencing Exxon. And at the time, Exxon owned Friendswood. Um, but there's NASA, there's rocket scientists and engineers that live in Clear Lake. And then I've got engineers that live in Kingwood. Now, Kingwood's becoming a little bit more, there is, a little bit more diversity within the economic system up here, that they're not all Exxon engineers anymore. But I mean, I'm here to tell you there's a lot of them still. And I've lived here. I'm not an engineer. I own a computer company. So it's not like I'm there. So I live in a gerrymandered district, and my voice at Houston City Council has been diluted by the NASA crew 100, an hour and a half south of me, because they didn't want the extra votes in the city of Houston. So that is a gerrymandered district. That is the true definition of gerrymandering. Now, is it against the Voting Rights Act? They took all the white people and put them in one district, is really what they did. Nobody has said anything since 1994. Nobody's looked at this. But what my point is that when I was talking about this Ligon thing, somebody said, "Oh, well, they are, we lived in a gerrymandered Senate district." No, actually, we really don't. That Senate district goes from Montgomery County, it goes from Harris County, it goes to Montgomery County, it goes to Chambers County, it goes to Jefferson County, and it goes to Galveston County. It literally has 5 counties involved in it. That is not gerrymandering. That is not the definition of gerrymandering. And they didn't put together all like-minded people in the Senate district. This particular district is not gerrymandered. Now, is there a heavy concentration of red in Montgomery County and a heavy concentration of red in Harris County, in the part of Harris County that is in SD4? Absolutely. But is the district gerrymandered? When I start to go south, it's rural out that way. If I go to, I've got the edge of Port Arthur and Beaumont involved in all of this, which is Jefferson County, and that is a much more racially diverse community. So no, that is not the definition of gerrymandering. Kingwood is gerrymandered. SD4 is not gerrymandered. Okay, but so that's what I was going to come and talk about, because this lady was saying that she could, she lives in a gerrymandered district and she's got this guy that's red that's going to represent her, and she's a blue person, so therefore she's gerrymandered. And it's not the proper use of the word. So in the time of this all that happened, I went and I saw a social media post go by, and I thought it was interesting, so I want to kind of talk about it. So Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Vermont, Hawaii, and Delaware have no Republican senators or House of Representative Congresspeople. Out of that, New Hampshire or Massachusetts is 30%, 36% Republican. Connecticut is 42% Republican. Maine is 46% Republican. New Hampshire is 48% Republican. Rhode Island is 42%. Vermont is 32%. Hawaii is 38%. And Delaware is 42%. So I started to look at this and think about, well, is that really, what is that looking? And this is where I tell you, balance what you're reading, right? So you could say, oh, look, they have zero, except that Delaware only has one person. So if I have an election for the one person, for the one congressperson in Delaware, I'm going to lose 58 to 42, right? Okay. So that one makes sense. Hawaii is 38. We only have two there. Vermont, 32% Republican. There's only one congressperson there. The only one of these that I really think is a issue, and I'll tell you, Maryland is 64% Democrat, and all their congresspeople are Democrats. That makes sense to me. Almost the whole population is Democrat. So of course, but these people that are in New Hampshire, well, that's 48, but they only have 2 seats. But that should have a plurality, and therefore maybe it should be one, so because what they're doing is they're taking these congressional districts and drawing it in a way that makes it more Republican or more Democrat. And they're doing it by race. And I don't necessarily just mean that by minority race. they're also putting all the white people together too. So everybody is aggrieved in this. But I don't necessarily agree with saying all these people are zero. And now what I will say is in a state like New Hampshire, a state like Connecticut, there's enough Massachusetts even, one third of the Congress people in Massachusetts, if the lines were drawn right, I think we would probably end up with at least a one third of nine, which would be three, would be should be Republican. So they're drawing districts in these states, and make no mistake, it's the Democrats that are doing these things, okay? First and foremost. They are drawing their districts so that they are making sure there's enough concentration of Democrats in those districts that they literally have a state. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. We've got 8 states that have goose eggs for no Republican representation, yet 40 to 45% of the people on average, if I average these numbers out, it should be a 60-40 split or a 70-30 split. It shouldn't be 100% of a zero. Okay. So that would be an example of gerrymandering. Okay. Um, I also looked at New Jersey. New Jersey's interesting because New Jersey has 25% Republicans, but they only have 38% Democrats. They have 35% of independents, and yet they're 9-3 on their Congress representation. New York is interesting to me because they're 14-10, so they're kind of okay on that. California is another one that's 25% Republican, 45% Democrat, but 26% of that is independents again. And yet, well, I guess right now that's maybe 50-42. So Pennsylvania is split right up the middle. There's only 12% independents on that, and they're 9-8. So some of these states are doing it right. And some of these states, to my mind, are drawing congressional districts that take into account who lives in them to put certain demographics together to dilute them, and then certain demographics together to gain more representation. Okay. It should just be what do they say? About 2 million people, 1.5 million people per congressional district. I kind of pulled the number and I think I forgot what the number was, but it was like maybe 750,000. It was like there was a certain number in a formula that went against how many people you had to have in your district. Okay. So when I'm saying all of this, to draw those lines and bring in and make it be so that you have zero representation, that's not a two-party system. The objective here is not to turn the House of Representatives into 100% one color or 1% meaning red and blue, or 100% in the opposite color. And the fact that we have this many states that have zero representation, although their populations are 45%, trust me, that is not the way the framers intended this to be. Okay. This is manipulation of the voter base. So I had all of this written down because this lady in SD4 is gerrymandered. I was like, you know what? That's somebody that doesn't even actually know what gerrymandered is. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about something that the Commissioner's Court did down in the city of Houston. So we have the mayor of Houston, but we also have a Commissioner's Court that sees what is called unincorporated areas of Harris County. And they, in order to gain a seat back a few years ago, there was a perennial favorite, and he represented a large percentage of the red people, red districts of Harris County. And he had been there a long time, and that was fine. There was a second gentleman that also was in a red district. And what they came in and did is they flip-flopped those two districts. So the guy that is now over my area, initially we didn't vote for him. And the other guy was running for reelection. And because he was running for reelection, it made it far easier for them to defeat because the guy didn't have the name recognition in the area. So, because of these tricks, they literally did this. That's another form of gerrymandering. I mean, you do not take a whole district, take the person that they voted for, and move him to another area and give you somebody you didn't vote for. And then to try to, and it worked because Leslie Briones has her seat. Why? Because this area was, they flip flopped it, took Cagle out, and the people's names don't really matter. But so these are the things, and that was a Republican commissioners court that did that. So as much as we're screaming about 5 congressional districts here in Texas, and oh my gosh, they're gerrymandering districts and they're doing this and they're trying to do that, I'm going to say something too. Okay. I'm very worried about the this I guess it's CD9, CD7, whatever it is. This one down in Pasadena that they just created because they used a failed model, meaning that they used the 2024 election to use the predictability of whether an area is red or not, and people crossed over to vote for Trump. So you have to be very careful in using 2024 numbers because there's a lot of inaccuracies in that. So the Supreme Court now came out and said you cannot, thank God somebody has some sense in all of this, you cannot take groups of people and put them together to gerrymander a district so that you have more minorities in the district, which usually go to, I wish the minorities would wake up and realize the Democrats weren't on their side. But the minority district, to do more minority districts so that you had more Democrat seats, you should just put people together by their geographic boundaries and stop altering them and doing calisthenics and making things elongated and making them go this way. So you put certain groups of people together so you get the outcome you want. Just, I think it has to stop. And I'm glad to see that the Supreme Court put a stop to this, because by dividing stuff, it also is not good for Sheila Jackson Lee was perennial person here, right? Okay. That district is terrible. Um, there was no money ever really put into it. The oversight of that community is really horrific, if you ask me. Um, and I probably, and I haven't done this, I might need to do this, but look at the backing and the standing. Um, I should, you should have, you look at like these neighborhoods and they're not being well taken care of. And I think if I went Dem by Dem neighborhood, you would find a lot of poverty in these Dem neighborhoods, but it's been that way for 50 years. So where are you making it better? And I think if you put different groups of people together, all boats would rise. But then I have to ask myself, do do we want all boats to rise? Is this a form of oppression to try to keep the minorities pushed down by giving them improper adequate representation? So by balling them together, causing it to be a Democrat district, and then putting no effort into that district, the schools in those districts are bad. The crime in those neighborhoods are bad. I mean, the list is horrific. And then, some of those folks, they'll move out to other districts. Good for them. If they can move and go to a better neighborhood and put their kids in better schools, more power to them. Um, but I don't think that we should be utilizing Congress to pick winners and losers and balling groups of people together. We should be trying to make all boats rise. We should be putting ourselves together. Like, if you're really good at one thing and you're really good at another, put them together and offset each other. Those are the best kind of relationships, as opposed to pitting them against each other. Those are the worst kind of relationships. So I think I'm glad that the Supreme Court, everybody's like the Voting Rights Act. okay? And they're all screaming like stuck pigs about the Voting Rights Act. This is 2026, and I don't think that there's any person that's here in this country legally that is suppressed or stopped from voting. Okay. If you want to go vote, you're going to go vote. I really feel like Gen X was the last generation that really that or the first generation. Let me say that a little differently. We were a generation that never saw segregated bathrooms or segregated society. It was never something in our radar. It was never something that um we weren't raised that way. I mean, I guess that's the best way to say that. We keep going back to these 1950 norms that we think are still there, except I've never lived one day in a country where somebody couldn't walk into a restaurant. Um, I mean, I was born in 1966 after all of this kind of happened. So when we look at all of this, I really think that we're taking some old things, and the one thing that I've learned is that there is a lot of money in all of this, and that's what these people don't want to lose is money. And they're not there for the greater good of the people. They're how much money can they bilk out of the people? And that's or the donors. I should say the donors because it's not the little guy on the street. It's the donor class that's, you know, shoveling piles of money in, and then it's going back out to these candidates. They're coming in for candidates. The money grab in this is just unbelievable. It's just mind numbing. So I'm glad the Supreme Court came in and did a sensible thing and said you cannot make congressional districts based on demographics. It should just be on zip codes and put them together right and not make these really weird things so that you can put certain classes of people together. I would like to look at the city of Houston and say to them now under this, maybe it's federal, but maybe Kingwood and Clear Lake each need to have their own representative because at the end of the day, I have an awesome Houston city councilman. He is fantastic. And he has represented both districts and I give him all the credit in the world. But the lift is exponentially harder for him because he's got to cover this large area that was held together by a stream. It is not a legitimate, and now under this, you have to look at that and say, what were we gerrymandered? And maybe the city of Houston needs to go back and look and put in an extra Houston City Council seat for either us, because we were second to be annexed. Clear Lake was first, and then Kingwood was second. So, um, anyway, I was very happy, but I understand that this gerrymandering thing, it is not the end of the world. It's a way to start to level the playing field. It is, I do not believe that this is going to hurt people. I actually think it's going to help minorities because it's going to put districts together that we're going to have, everybody rowing in the same direction, regardless of skin color or economic background. It's not going to put people in groups just so that somebody can have more elected seats in the House of Representatives. And I would love to get where all people were, in a good spot, and that they weren't oppressed, and they weren't. And I think the only way to do that is to put everybody together and stop looking at this from an ethnic or a racial background and start looking at it from a, hey, this is our group. We're all together. Let's everybody work together and get the best person we possibly can. So with that said, that's a lot of what I've had to cover today. This is Beth Guide. With Talking Purple, and I want to make sense common again. You all have a good week, and I will talk to you soon.